Hey guys, tonight, we dive headfirst, gently of course, into a realm where velvet sheets meet iron crowns, where silk gowns sweep over cold castle floors, and where behind every stained glass window might lurk a stranger custom than you bargained for. Welcome to the shadowy, candle-lit corridors of medieval royalty. And not just any royalty tonight is all about queens, their beds, their rituals, their very strange obligations. You'll travel barefoot across cold stone into chambers where privacy was a word no one had invented yet. You'll listen to soft footsteps behind brocade curtains, hear whispers between palace maids, and smell herbs burning to bless the royal mattress. But be warned, some of these practices might make your modern mattress feel suspiciously tame. And you probably won't survive this if you're squeamish about ceremonial voyeurism. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing the world light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin where all medieval queens did the wedding bed. But unlike modern honeymoons, this wasn't exactly a private affair. In fact, consummation was a formalized, partially public, ritualized event. You and your royal husband wouldn't just slip away for some romantic alone time. Oh no. The entire court, or at least its most powerful members, might escort you to the bedchamber, say a few solemn words, sprinkle holy water, and then wait outside. Sometimes they didn't even leave. In parts of Europe, like late medieval France, bedding witnesses were appointed. These lucky souls stood respectfully by the bed, ears perked, waiting to confirm consummation with a nod, and perhaps even a well-timed cheer. You can almost hear the muffled giggles of the noble ladies trying to keep their composure behind heavy velvet curtains. The wedding night wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a national affair. Because when you're a queen, sex means politics. Your body quite literally becomes a treaty. The king must enter the alliance, and the alliance must bear fruit, preferably a boy. Everyone's counting. Sometimes this led to high-stakes awkwardness. If a king couldn't perform too drunk, too nervous, too uninterested, rumors would swirl like chimney smoke. A queen, too, might be whispered about. Was she too icy, too unwilling? Was this marriage doomed before the sheets were even wrinkled? In England, the bedding ceremony could be extra formal. Take the example of Margaret of Anjou and King Henry VI. Their marriage was so politically charged that members of the court reportedly carried the couple to the bed in a grand procession. After the door closed, everyone waited and waited. And then, nothing. Historians still argue whether Henry ever fully consummated the marriage, or was even capable of it. But not all consummations were so dull. In Spain and parts of Italy, the bloody sheet tradition reigned. After the act, a servant might collect the bed linens, present them to both families, and display them publicly, proof of virginity lost and legitimacy secured. You're probably wincing, and rightly so. This sheet wasn't just laundry. It was political evidence, personal shame, or sometimes even fake. Yes, there are cases where midwives or maids allegedly doctored the sheets using animal blood or clever substitutions to ensure the right story got told. You're lying there freshly married, possibly in pain, definitely overwhelmed, and someone's out there dabbing goat blood onto linen like it's a crime scene cover-up. Meanwhile, fertility rituals buzzed around queens like bees in a herb garden. Priests chanted Latin blessings over the couple's chamber. Herbalists tucked mugwort and pennyroyal beneath pillows to open the womb. And yes, even astrologers got involved. A royal horoscope might determine the best time for the first union, no pressure if the stars were in retrograde. Some rituals went deeper into the surreal. In certain Slavic traditions, a newlywed queen might receive symbolic gifts like carved wooden phalluses, yes, really, or fertility dolls dressed in miniature royal robes. These were sometimes placed at the foot of the marital bed to inspire conception, or at least remind the couple what was at stake. Queens, of course, often had no choice in the matter. They were usually teenagers, 14, 15, sometimes younger, married off to older kings for the sake of alliance. The entire court might hold its breath, waiting for signs of pregnancy. And if none came, whispers would start. Herbs would be increased. Doctors called. And sometimes blame would quietly shift to you, the queen. It's a lot to carry, especially when you're wearing 20 pounds of brocade and haven't slept in 3 days. But let's not forget the role of symbolism. The royal bedchamber was almost sacred. It was often the most decorated room in the castle, full of tapestries, painted ceilings, and symbols of fertility, rabbits, vines, grapes, swans. The bed itself might be gilded high off the ground, with steps leading up like a throne. You didn't just climb into it, you ascended. And when the act was done, some courts recorded it in actual paperwork. A dry bureaucratic note might be made that the union was completed with due ceremony. You know, just in case the baby needed notarized legitimacy later. So you pull the velvet sheets up to your chin. The candles flicker low, and you wonder who's really watching: the court, the church, the stars above. Being a queen meant your most intimate moment was also a political performance, and the audience never really left. You haven't quite caught your breath from that ceremonial spectacle, and yet the next morning brings something possibly worse than public betting, the post-game analysis. Because in some medieval courts, it wasn't enough that you did the deed, it had to be verified. Welcome to the bizarre, intrusive world of virginity inspectors and wedding night audits. You wake up to find the chambermaids bustling in with a little too much interest in the sheets. There's a sudden knock, and in comes a priest, or worse, a midwife appointed by the church. She's here not to help you recover, but to make sure everything went exactly as expected. Blood check. Physical signs of deflowering. Check. Your modesty optional. In some parts of Europe, especially during the 13th and 14th centuries, brides of royal or noble rank were subjected to virginity inspections before the wedding. These weren't polite interviews or secret letters from your governess. These were physical exams usually conducted by older women, midwives, or court physicians. Imagine being 16, terrified, and told to lie down while strangers certify your eligibility to become queen. You're probably thinking this feels more like livestock trading than matrimony. And you'd be right. The idea was to confirm the bride's purity, a virtue tied up not just with personal morality, but with dynastic legitimacy. A queen who wasn't a virgin posed a terrifying risk. What if the firstborn child wasn't the king's? So out came the examiners. And yes, they checked for a hymen, though, as any modern doctor could tell you. That's an unreliable test at best. Historians still argue whether these inspections were ever consistent or just elaborate rituals designed to reinforce control over royal women. And if you were found wanting, the consequences could be brutal. marriages annulled, reputations shredded, wars even. Queen Joan of Navarre, for instance, faced ugly rumors of sexual impropriety before her marriage to King Henry IV of England. Though never proven, the whispers alone were enough to tarnish her in the eyes of both court and clergy. Let's talk about the bloody sheet audit again, because this wasn't just a Southern European quirk. In some regions, the morning after sheet was paraded around the castle, hung from balconies, or even carried in processions. You're lying in bed sore and possibly confused, and outside people are clapping at a piece of linen like it's the crown jewels. Talk about pressure. And then there were trial marriages. Yes, those existed. In certain Scandinavian and Germanic traditions, noble couples could undergo a test bedding to determine sexual compatibility. Sometimes this happened before the official wedding under strict supervision. The idea wasn't romance, it was practical. You had to prove you could produce heirs. If things didn't go well, the engagement might be called off. Or worse, you might still be married just with everyone knowing why the sheets stayed clean. Now, it wasn't always brutal. In some Italian courts, the inspections took a slightly more symbolic form, like bathing rituals supervised by noble women, or fertility prayers whispered during the disrobing. Still awkward, still controlling, but at least slightly less invasive. Queens often went along with it, heads high, expressions blank. You learn quickly in a royal role how to disassociate. There's one peculiar case from the Byzantine Empire where a queen-to-be was inspected by 2 bishops and 4 midwives in the presence of the emperor himself. The bishops naturally weren't medical experts, but they were quite opinionated. The poor girl passed barely, and the whole thing was documented in state records as if her body were a building certified by an architect. But it's not all bad news. Some queens fought back. Take Queen Isabella of France, the she-wolf of England. She married King Edward II, a man more interested in his male favorites than his wife. Their wedding night was underwhelming, to say the least. But Isabella used the court's obsession with bedding ceremonies against him. Years later, during her rebellion, she referenced Edward's failure to produce a proper heir, without interference, a sharp, veiled jab at both his sexuality and the system that judged hers. And then there's Anne of Brittany, married to 2 French kings in her lifetime. Known for her wit, she allegedly once commented on the absurdity of virginity tests by pointing out that a woman's worth wasn't stitched into her anatomy. Bold words in a time when even saying hymen out loud could be seen as indecent. Of course, your body doesn't belong to you in this world. It belongs to the kingdom, the church, the bloodline. You're a queen, but you're also a vessel, a symbol, a signed and sealed contract of flesh. And the worst part, if things went wrong, no blood, no baby, no signs, the blame almost always landed on you. Not the king, not the church, not the absurdity of their science. Just you. You might be sent away, banished, or simply locked in your own palace with your virtue in question and your future erased. Yet through all this, queens developed quiet forms of rebellion, secret herbal remedies, allied midwives, silent networks of women who whispered, who warned, who knew the rules were fake and the games were rigged. Some queens even staged their wedding nights using trick-lighting swapped bed sheets or a bit of pig's blood to ensure the expected evidence appeared right on schedule. No one wants to talk about those tricks in history books, but you can be sure they happened. You can almost hear the soft laughter behind closed doors. So now, with morning sunlight hitting the stained glass window and the weight of 1,000 expectations draped across your body, you sit up. The midwives are gone. The bishop's report is filed. The sheet is on tour. You smile faintly, because you've survived night one of being a queen. And whether or not anyone believes you, you know what really happened under those covers. You might think that after the grand bedding ceremony and the linen show-and-tell things would settle down a bit. Maybe you could steal a few quiet evenings by the fire with a good book and a disinterested husband. But no, this is the medieval court, and the drama hasn't even stretched yet. Because tonight you start noticing a pattern. A priest with oddly clean hands appears a little too frequently near your chambers. A musician lingers long after his performance ends, and your favorite lady-in-waiting keeps sneaking smiles at the new eunuch servant who looks suspiciously muscular. Welcome to the world of queens and their lovers in disguise. Despite the rules, strict pious, often enforced by death medieval queens were still human. Desire didn't magically vanish beneath the crown, and sometimes they found ways to satisfy it. Not openly, of course, but with cleverness, timing, and a wardrobe department that would rival a theater troupe. Take Queen Margaret of Anjou again. She lived in a court rife with rumor, war, and whispering factions. One particular courtier, William de la Pole, seemed to rise through the ranks very quickly and was seen entering her chambers suspiciously often under various pretenses. Historians still argue whether he was her lover or just a very dedicated servant. But you can imagine the raised eyebrows. In a palace where everyone's watching, sometimes the only way to keep a secret is to put it in costume. One of the oldest tricks in the royal book, the monk disguise. Monks had almost unrestricted access to palaces. They could move between rooms for confession, for counsel, for spiritual comfort. So if a courtier or even a knight donned a habit and lowered his eyes, he could slip right into the queen's wing without question. Suddenly, that late-night confession takes on a whole new meaning. And don't forget the eunuch ruse. In many courts, especially in the Byzantine and Ottoman worlds, eunuchs were trusted as safe attendants for noble women. After all, they were seen as non-threatening asexual. But some men faked it, either bribing surgeons for fake certificates or simply lying well enough to pass inspection. You're the queen, and your eunuch seems oddly attentive, strangely handsome, and very, very not eunuch-like. Of course, this wasn't just about sex. Sometimes these hidden relationships were power plays. Having a lover meant having an ally, someone to confide and plot with, or even manipulate the court through. Queens who were sidelined politically often found ways to pull strings behind the scenes. A clever man in disguise could carry messages, broker alliances, or tip the scales of royal intrigue with a well-timed whisper in bed. But it was dangerous. Very dangerous. Adultery for queens wasn't just a scandal, it was treason. You weren't just cheating on a husband. You were undermining the entire bloodline. If a child resulted and the king wasn't the father, that was a dynastic disaster waiting to happen. So if a queen was caught, punishment was swift and brutal. Consider the infamous case of Agnes Sorel, the mistress of King Charles VII of France. She wasn't a queen, but her open affair with the king stirred enough backlash to make royal consorts tremble. She was gifted Jules land and even had a seat at court, all while Queen Marie of Anjou sat fuming in the background. The queen couldn't act, but many speculate she found quieter ways to strike back. There's also a chilling English example, Queen Caroline Matilda, sister of King George III and consort to the Danish king. Her affair with physician Johann Struensee, who gained immense influence over the king, eventually led to both their downfalls. She was exiled. He was executed. So yes, the risks were very real. But sometimes the disguises worked. You sit in your chamber, candlelight flickering, and your confessor closes the door behind him. To the outside world, it's just a prayer session. But to you, it's a brief stolen moment of real connection, a rare spark in a life of political coldness. You're risking everything, but for once you chose. There's an especially juicy rumor from the Hungarian court of Queen Elizabeth of Bosnia. One of her attendants, a harpist, was supposedly much more than a musician. He had a custom-built harp case just large enough to fit a person. On moonless nights, he would be smuggled into her chamber and hidden inside until the doors were locked. You can almost hear the soft pluck of strings echoing off stone walls, along with a few other less musical sounds. Was it true? Historians still argue. Some say it's poetic embellishment. Others point to records of sudden harpist promotions and unexplained dismissals. Either way, the image is unforgettable. But even for queens who didn't act on these temptations, the accusations were always lurking. Any man too close, any servant too loyal could become fuel for gossip. One wrong glance in a garden, one gift too intimate, and the court would start to whisper. You live in a world where a smile is an alibi or an accusation. Yet, despite the danger, these queens found ways. Through veils, letters, body language. Through codes only they and their lovers understood. A dropped ribbon, a folded page, a change in perfume. You might be locked in a gilded cage, but you can still pass notes between the bars. Tonight, as you lie back on the embroidered pillows, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, you hear a soft knock. A servant enters with your nightly draft. Or is he just a servant? He says nothing, avoids your eyes, but his fingers brush yours just slightly as he hands you the goblet. A glance too long, a silence too deep. And then he's gone. And you're left wondering, was that just wine or a message in disguise? You sit at your ornate vanity, a silver-handled brush gliding slowly through your hair, when your lady-in-waiting offers you tonight's tonic. It smells faintly of cinnamon clove and something else, something bitter, smoky, and ancient. You swallow it without question. Because you, dear queen, live in a time when desire, fertility, and power are all chemical experiments, often conducted on your body without your full understanding. Welcome to the strange world of alchemy, aphrodisiacs, and womb-healing potions. In the medieval royal court, the queen's body wasn't just a vessel, it was a laboratory. From the moment you were married and sometimes before, an entire industry buzzed around your reproductive system. Healers, monks, alchemists, herb wives, and quack physicians lined up with elixirs and tinctures promising everything from fertility to correct desire. You were expected to take them regularly. The tonics came in many forms: thick honeyed wines laced with myrrh rosewater, infused with crushed pearls, or opaque brews made with mandrake root and saffron. Some had known herbal effects, others were downright dangerous. One particularly popular aphrodisiac, Spanish fly. Yes, that infamous little beetle ground into a powder and slipped into wine. It causes irritation in the urinary tract, which was mistakenly interpreted as arousal. You can imagine how many queens grimaced through a romantic evening after a dose of that, and yet you drink. Because if you don't conceive quickly, the court starts to worry. If you're cold toward your husband, it must be your humors, your womb's position, your hot and dry temperament as described by Galenic medicine. You could be prescribed a diet of rabbit meat almonds and figs, or more alarmingly advised, to wear a warm compress of roasted onions over your abdomen. One documented cure for sexual reluctance: a poultice made of crushed nettles, goose fat, and a tiny bit of owl blood applied directly to your feet. Why the feet? No one knew, but it was believed that lust flowed upwards. You're trying not to gag as the concoction is slathered on your heels, all while a midwife hums a fertility chant under her breath. Some queens embraced these rituals. Others endured them. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine was rumored to have favored exotic Eastern spices, nutmeg, cardamom, and clove not just for taste, but for their supposed aphrodisiac effects. Whether she believed in their magic or just liked smelling like a well-traveled caravan is anyone's guess. But the line between medicine and magic was thin. Very thin. You often didn't know whether your healer was an apothecary or a sorcerer. A tincture for conception might be blessed by a priest buried overnight in the garden or stirred counterclockwise under a full moon. Sometimes all three. You're sipping from a goblet, not just to bear a child, but to align your stars, calm your humors, and invite divine pleasure. There's an old Slavic recipe passed among royal women involving boiled snakeskin yarrow and mare's milk. Said to open the womb, it was reserved for queens who had failed to conceive after 3 months. You think of the taste, the texture, and the way the attendants would whisper prayers as they handed it to you. Drink all of it, they'd urge, or the womb will close like a window in winter. Of course, not all these potions were about making you want sex. Some were about making you forget it, or hide it. Abortifacients, though rarely spoken of, existed in the medieval world, especially among women who knew the old herbal ways. Queen Catherine de' Medici, known for her interest in pharmacology, reportedly kept secret notes on purging tonics should a mistress or a queen require quiet resolution to a royal problem. And sometimes the potions weren't for you at all. Sometimes they were for him, the king. Queens quietly paid court apothecaries for masculine enhancers, hoping to spark interest in a tired or uninterested royal partner. A sprig of lovage tucked in his wine, a dusting of powdered ambergris on his pillow. All of it part of the delicate, dangerous game of ensuring your bed remained politically and physically productive. Historians still argue whether these remedies ever worked, or whether they were psychological theater-comforting gestures to help a frightened queen believe she had some control. Maybe you felt more desirable after the potion. Maybe your skin flushed just enough to convince the king. Or maybe it was all a beautifully brewed placebo. But you also learned to perform, to sip dramatically, to smile as the potion touches your lips, to lie still as the alchemist places heated stones near your hips, claiming it will rebalance your elements. You let him work, knowing full well he's basing your anatomy on diagrams drawn from goats. Yet even as the physicians buzz around, you start to learn. You pick up the names of herbs: mugwort for cramping, Queen Anne's lace for delay, pennyroyal for discretion. You develop quiet relationships with the older women in court, the ones who've seen it all, who know what works, who know what's safe. You trust them more than any royal physician. And then one day a new potion appears. It's said to come from the east. It smells of sandalwood and roses. It's bitter on the tongue, but warm in the chest. They say it ensures not just conception, but love. You hesitate. Is it worth the risk, or is this just another performance? You drink anyway. Not because you believe it, but because in a world where everyone tries to control your body, this one moment of choice still belongs to you. You set the cup down, close your eyes, and let the heat spread through your stomach, your heart, your mind. Maybe tonight the king will notice you. Maybe tonight he won't. But at least your breath smells like clove and mystery. The bedchamber is dim tonight. The candles burn low, their wax sagging like tired courtiers. You sit perfectly still, cloaked in perfume and protocol. But something is off. You're not supposed to be here, at least not really you. Because in the strange theater of medieval royalty, sometimes it wasn't the queen who greeted the king in the dark, but someone else entirely. Tonight you step into the whispered world of sex by proxy queens and the art of substitution. It sounds like myth, doesn't it? A queen too unwilling or politically cautious to risk the royal bed, so she arranges for another woman to take her place. But this was no fairy tale flourish. In royal courts where survival hinged on heirs' image and obedience, a clever substitution could solve a dozen problems at once. Its high-stakes improvisation often cloaked in candlelight and silence. One of the most persistent legends comes from medieval Persia, where it was rumored that a queen displeased with the king's brutality replaced herself with a veiled handmaiden on scheduled conjugal nights. The ruse went on for months. The handmaiden bore a child. The child was raised as royal. The king never knew. Historians still argue whether the story is fact or embellished legend, but it lingers in records and poetry like a secret smirk. Closer to Europe, rumors swirled around Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, wife of Charles VI of France. Her husband's frequent bouts of madness made their physical relationship strained, if not impossible. Some reports suggest that during the king's more lucid but violent episodes, Isabeau quietly arranged for chambermaids to stand in. No one officially confirmed it. But odd gaps in court records and sudden promotions among her attendants suggest something unusual was afoot. And why wouldn't a queen resort to such measures? If the king was unpredictable or repulsive or dangerous, sending someone else was a means of self-preservation. And sometimes the king didn't even notice. You imagine it, the room dim, the woman silent, the act mechanical. The king drunk or distracted never thinks to question the curve of a wrist or the absence of a familiar perfume. Some substitutions weren't to protect the queen, but to fool the king into thinking an heir had been conceived. In rare and contested cases, a queen unable to conceive might arrange for a lady-in-waiting to become pregnant by another man, then present the child as her own. It was high treason if discovered. But if successful, a kingdom continued uninterrupted. In fact, an entire architectural trend developed to enable such ruses. Mirror chambers rooms with reflective panels or multiple entries allowed for illusions and substitutions during royal visits. A queen could begin the evening at the edge of the bed, then, under the cover of darkness and fabric, let someone else finish it. It's no coincidence that Queen Anne of Denmark's chambers were famously remodeled with thick tapestries and secret alcoves. While there's no solid proof she ever employed a proxy, courtiers whispered that not all shadows belong to her. But there's another layer to this one that goes beyond deception control. In a world where the queen's body was owned by the crown, the court, the country's substitution could be a quiet rebellion. A way to say you may have access, but not to me. You control the narrative, the outcome, even the illusion of compliance. Of course, such deceptions could backfire. Take the scandalous and likely apocryphal tale of Queen Violante of Aragon, who allegedly used a body double to avoid her husband's attentions during a particularly tense political period. One night, the king, suspicious, used a ring to mark his wife's inner thigh. The next morning he checked. No mark. The game was up. Violante denied everything, but the court had already turned. She spent her final years in quiet disgrace. True story, no one knows, but it was repeated enough to make future queens think twice. Even the church had opinions on this. Substitution was considered deception, sure, but not always heresy. Certain bishops quietly sympathized. Others naturally condemned it. The queen must lie with her husband, or the nation shall suffer, wrote one 14th century theologian, and it must be she, not her likeness, not her lady's shadow. You can practically hear the wagging finger in the margins. Yet even beyond royal duty, substitution was sometimes part of an erotic performance. In the court of Frederick II, there were whispered accounts of elaborate masquerades where the queen and her attendants wore identical veils, danced in slow circles, and let the king guess who was who. It was said to excite him and, more importantly, give the queen cover if she wished to disappear. But perhaps the strangest record of all comes from a tiny alpine court where a queen reportedly used a life-sized wax mannequin to fake her presence during conjugal nights, while she carried on with her true lover elsewhere in the palace. The mannequin, dressed in royal linens and dabbed with perfume, fooled the half-blind king for weeks, until the summer heat softened the wax and melted the illusion. Literally, whether true or tall tale, the practice of proxy intimacy highlights one critical thing: queens were never powerless. Restricted absolutely, watched always. But within those limitations, they became masters of shadow, of illusion, of being seen without being known. And you sit on your silken sheets, listening to footsteps in the hallway. A door creaks open. A man enters, expecting one thing, perhaps receiving another. You remain still, a silent participant in a centuries-old tradition of tricks and survival. And in the flickering dark, maybe you smile, not because you're in love, but because the game is still yours to play. The chapel bells have long since quieted their echoes, swallowed by the damp stone walls of the palace. You should be asleep. Instead, you wander silently through the maze of corridors, following candlelight and hushed voices toward a side chamber. Inside, laughter. Two women, heads bowed close, a shared secret. And in that flickering moment, you stumble into one of the court's most forbidden whispered corners, forbidden passions, nuns, ladies in waiting, and power games. As queen, you are surrounded by women. All day, every day, they lace your corset, oil your hair, deliver your letters, guard your secrets. They are your shadows, your mirrors, your only friends in a world where every man sees you as political capital. And in that closeness, something strange begins to bloom. A shared glance while dressing. A touch that lingers. The kind of comfort your husband never provides. And suddenly, you find yourself navigating a space that medieval society refuses to name. Romantic relationships between women were never loudly discussed in court, but they existed. Letters from the time reveal startling intimacy. Your kiss lingers on my lips, still writes one noblewoman to her mistress. If only I could sleep beside you again under our shared quilt. Innocent friendship, possibly. Historians still argue whether these declarations were platonic or coded confessions of deeper longing. But in a world of arranged marriages, unwanted husbands, and relentless scrutiny, women often turn to each other for both solace and pleasure. The queen's attendants, especially her ladies-in-waiting, were often young, unmarried noblewomen, selected for their beauty, grace, and loyalty. They lived in tight quarters, bathed together, traveled together, and shared beds during long winters. And as you can imagine, boundaries blurred. Consider the court of Queen Christina of Sweden, who, though later than our medieval setting, left a thick trail of scandalous letters and suggestive portraits. She never married and was rumored to have had passionate relationships with multiple female courtiers. Her famously masculine style and refusal to adhere to feminine expectations only fueled the fire. Though her case is later, it echoes down into earlier centuries, when queens learned to balance public chastity with private curiosities. Even in the rigid religious structure of medieval convents, female closeness sometimes crossed into intimacy. Some queens, either by choice or exile, retired to monasteries, where the line between spiritual sisterhood and romantic companionship grew dangerously thin. Hildegard of Bingen, though revered as a mystic, wrote of soul unions between nuns that exceeded even the bonds of husband and wife. Again, historians debate the meaning, but the language is hard to ignore. And then, of course, there are the power games. Sometimes affection wasn't about love, it was about control. A queen might shower one lady-in-waiting with attention to isolate another, or forge such a close emotional bond that the woman became her secret weapon, spying, blackmailing, distracting. You learn that in a palace where men play chess with armies, women often play chess with hearts. A famous rumor from the court of Queen Isabella of Castile involved her mysterious relationship with Beatrice de Bobadilla, a courtier so fiercely loyal that jealous nobles nicknamed her the Queen's right hand. When Isabella married Ferdinand, Beatrice was suddenly exiled to a distant castle. The reason was never stated, but letters from that time suggest Ferdinand saw her as a threat, not politically, but emotionally. Of course, the Church had thoughts. Female-female intimacy, though not always explicitly condemned like male homosexuality, was still labeled unnatural. Confessors were instructed to ask about inappropriate affection or excessive closeness between women. If caught, punishments ranged from penance and forced separation to full expulsion from court. But most queens weren't caught, because unlike with male lovers, there was no pregnancy, no bedding witnesses, no bloody sheets to betray them. Just quiet glances and the kind of intimacy that left no evidence but longing, and some queens weaponized it. In the Hungarian court, one queen, allegedly childless and politically sidelined, began surrounding herself exclusively with women. She dismissed male servants, refused audiences with male nobles, and reportedly once shouted, "Only women understand the crown's weight." Her inner circle became a source of gossip, threat, and fascination. Was it a soft rebellion, a protective cocoon, or something more scandalous? And let's not forget the practicalities. Royal women bathed each other, massaged each other, helped each other dress. There's a sensuality in that closeness, whether romantic or not, that male historians often overlooked or chose not to see. But even if the physical boundaries were never crossed, the emotional bonds were real, fierce, often lifelong. You read of queens who even after marriage sent long, aching letters to former companions, who built chapels in their names, who insisted they be buried beside them. Tonight, as you slip into bed, your lady-in-waiting braids your hair in silence. Her fingers move gently. She doesn't speak. But when she finishes, her hand rests on your shoulder a moment too long. The candles burn low. Your heartbeat lingers in your ears. You look at her and she meets your eyes. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe everything does. But tomorrow she will bring your bath. She will lace your gown. And she will carry the weight of whatever this is locked behind a courtly smile. Because queens don't always love kings. Sometimes queens love each other. Morning in the palace. Not the gentle bird-song kind of morning, but the chaotic, door-slamming, chambermaid hissing kind. Something's happened. You barely have time to pull a robe around you before your steward informs you someone saw someone leaving your chambers last night. And just like that, you're no longer a queen. You're a rumor. In medieval courts, gossip was as powerful as a sword, and often sharper. Tonight we walk you into the underbelly of royal life where every glance, every whisper, every creaking floorboard might become the next sexual scandal of the century. You knew this would happen eventually. There are too many eyes in the palace. Too many lips that never stay sealed. Your position as queen makes you both untouchable and constantly touched by scrutiny, by suspicion, by those who want to use your body as a weapon without ever laying a hand on you. Start with the basics. You're being watched. Literally. Some palaces, especially in Spain and France, were designed with hidden passageways and grilles behind the walls. They allowed priests, advisors, or ambitious servants to spy under the pious excuse of safeguarding morality. You might be dressing, confessing, or just staring at the ceiling, and someone somewhere is taking notes. You'll never know what they saw. Only that one day it may be repeated back to you, distorted just enough to ruin your life. And oh, how quickly the rumors fly. One queen in the 13th century, unnamed in the records, but believed to be of the French royal house, was accused of an affair with not one but 7 of her husband's knights, all allegedly invited to her chambers on different nights cloaked in servants' clothing. The story spread like a disease across Europe. The truth, most historians now agree, it was politically motivated slander. But the damage was done. She was imprisoned, shaved of all title, and never seen in court again. Sometimes the gossip came from within. Your own ladies might turn on you out of jealousy, ambition, or fear. One poorly chosen favorite, too many gifts, or a moment of shared laughter in the wrong hallway, and suddenly you're familiar with her. Too familiar. You know the look of a maid who regrets what she's about to tell. You also know the smirk of one who doesn't. There's even a Latin phrase for it, scandalum magnatum, a legal term that protected high-ranking nobles from slander. But in practice, it was rarely enforced for queens. Because once a woman's name entered the rumor mill, no amount of parchment or punishment could take it back. Take Eleanor of Provence, wife of Henry III of England. She was accused of everything from poisoning rivals to seducing young courtiers with her French ways. No proof, no trials, just gossip. And yet she spent her final years away from court, an exile more social than official. But what if the rumors are true? Let's say just for a moment you do have a lover. Or did. Or someone who knows just enough to hint at it. In that case, you're no longer a person. You're blackmail material. A pawn. A target. In one chilling case, a 14th-century queen in Naples was forced to sign over lands and funds to a courtier who threatened to expose her affair with a Moorish scribe. The scandal never broke, but her lands never returned either. Historians still debate whether the affair happened or whether the threat alone was enough to steal a kingdom. Sometimes kings joined the gossip themselves, not to stop it, but to control it. When Queen Joan I of Navarre was rumored to be unfaithful, her husband, Charles II, leaned into the scandal, using it to justify reducing her influence, stripping her income, and eventually locking her in a convent. The allegations were never proven, but they didn't need to be. In court, accusation was conviction. But here's where it gets interesting. Some queens learned to weaponize the rumors. If they knew they couldn't escape the whispering, they leaned in carefully, subtly. They used scandal to seem more alluring, more powerful, even more dangerous. If they were going to be watched, they would control the narrative. Isabella of France, wife of Edward II, yes, her again, allowed certain rumors to circulate about her and Sir Roger Mortimer. Why? Because they distracted from her political maneuvers. The court was too busy giggling over love letters to notice her raising an army. By the time the ink dried on their gossip, she had taken the throne. Even queens with no scandal learned to borrow its flavor, dressing provocatively, hosting private candle-lit salons, laughing just a little too loudly in the presence of handsome guards. A whisper of temptation was sometimes more powerful than actual sin. But you're walking a tightrope. You know, one false step, one badly timed hallway crossing, or hand touch could bring it all crashing down. So you rehearse your smiles. You calculate the angle of your glances. You ask for your wine in public now. You sleep with the doors slightly ajar. And you keep a secret list written only in your head of who knows what and how badly they might want to use it. And sometimes you start the rumors yourself, because better to control the story than be surprised by it. Better to plant the idea that you're dangerous than be labeled weak. Better to be feared than pitied. You learn to wear scandal like a veil obscuring your true face while everyone speculates on what lies beneath. You lie in bed that night alone but not lonely. The candles flicker. Your servants whisper behind the walls. Somewhere in the palace, someone says your name with just enough heat to keep the fantasy alive. And maybe that's all the power you need. Midnight again. Another feast fading into memory. Another string quartet echoing down marble halls. You're still in your coronation silks, tired and glittering. You'd love to sleep, but tonight you can't. Because tonight is the full moon, and the palace midwife has summoned you to a locked chamber at the very edge of the royal gardens. The reason your dreams, your cravings, your womb's restlessness. Yes, welcome to the moonlit world of court astrology, dream reading, and sexual diagnosis, where your body is read like scripture and your desires charted like constellations. You step into the room heavy with the scent of crushed lavender and beeswax. A scroll lies open. An astrolabe glints on the table. The old midwife bows, then asks you to describe your dreams, particularly any dreams involving serpents, floods, or fire. Why? Because in this world, such symbols don't just signify imagination. They signal sexual imbalance, thwarted desire, or prophetic fertility. Here's the thing. In medieval courts, queens didn't just get sick. They were interpreted. If you couldn't conceive, or if you looked too flushed after morning prayer, Or if you snapped at a bishop during a fast, you were said to be out of alignment with the heavens. The Queen's chart. Your natal horoscope was often consulted not just for political decisions, but for sexual ones. A conjunction of Venus and Mars. Good night for royal bedding. Mercury in retrograde. Best not to tempt fate or the king's notoriously thin patience. Historians still argue whether astrology truly influenced bedroom calendars, but surviving court records in France and Castile show kings consulting astrologers before every major union, including union of the flesh. One especially absurd example, Queen Constance of Aragon, was reportedly ordered to delay intercourse for 3 days because Jupiter was too close to Saturn, which supposedly encouraged infertility. You can imagine how thrilled she was, especially since she was already 4 months married and under increasing pressure to produce an heir. But it wasn't just the stars. Your dreams became court documents. If you dreamed of water, it meant your humors were too cold, suggesting sexual reluctance. If you dreamed of animals, each species meant something different. A wolf, you were hungry for passion. A goat, you were accused of lust. A rabbit. Obvious. And unfortunately for you, you had that rabbit dream. Most. The Royal Dream Reader, yes, a real title in some courts, now stands at your elbow, scribbling her interpretation, while glancing at your wrists for signs of love pulses. You smile politely. It's either that or scream. Meanwhile, the court astrologer is far more interested in your lunar cycle than your marriage cycle. You're charted with precision when your menses begin, how long they last, whether your complexion dulls or glows. The moon affects the womb, they say. She is its mirror. Some queens, especially in Italy and Byzantium, were required to submit monthly reports to royal physicians who would then coordinate favorable nights for conception with your husband's schedule. There's one particularly strange ritual from the court of Hungary in the 1300s. If a queen went 6 months without conceiving, and she was brought barefoot into a moonlit garden and asked to sleep alone on a bed of herbs. Why? To reset her connection with the stars. Whether this worked is unlikely. But the ritual was said to reveal whether the issue lay with her or with the king. The next night, the stars would tell. Of course, all this celestial diagnosis often masked very earthly problems. Some kings simply weren't interested in their queens. Others had lovers. Others were, to put it gently, medically incapable. But you're the one they analyze. You're the one whose dreams are dissected like battle maps, whose body is blamed for whatever emptiness lingers in the royal cradle. And if you resist, if you say the stars are wrong or that maybe your rabbit dreams don't mean anything, you're accused of rebellion. Or worse, witchcraft. Yes, there it is again, that ever-present threat. A queen with too much knowledge of her body. A queen who questions the stars. A queen who denies the power of Venus in Aries. She must be hiding something. In England and northern Germany, some queens were even forced to undergo purification rites if their behavior was deemed astrologically cursed. A combination of herbs, prayer, and fasting, designed not to heal, but to control. And here's the delicious part, some queens played the game better than the men. You learn the symbols. You read your own charts. You make subtle suggestions. Perhaps tonight is not auspicious, you murmur. Venus wanes, and your husband nods, understanding nothing but unwilling to defy the stars. You've bought yourself another night of peace. You send dreams real or imagined to your advisors. I dreamed of fire, you say. I dreamed of floods. They nod, whisper shift their strategies. You're not just a vessel anymore. You're an oracle. And when the court begins to gossip again, this time about a certain guard who lingers too long near your chambers, you let the dream reader discover that his birth was under Scorpio. Lustful, bold, dangerous. He's reassigned within the week, because if the stars say it, it must be true. You lie in bed now, alone, wrapped in silks, and your chart rests nearby on your writing table. Mars is rising. Your moon is full. You smile. Maybe tonight you'll dream of rabbits again. Or maybe you'll dream of fire. Either way, someone will make a note. You wake before dawn, the air in your chambers heavy with incense and secrecy. Today is no ordinary day. Today you're expected to perform the most sacred and scrutinized duty of any medieval queen, the royal fertility ritual. Not a ceremony, not a quiet prayer, a publicly witnessed event designed to test, tempt, and sometimes humiliate the woman who bore the kingdom's future in her belly. Because now, dear queen, your worth is no longer measured by your beauty, your wit, or even your piety. It's measured by your womb. You're escorted through stone corridors to a chamber that smells faintly of dried herbs and freshly laundered linen. A circle of women awaits noble ladies, midwives, even a priest or two peering from behind velvet screens. They bow, they smile, but their eyes are already examining you. Today's ritual involves the water test, an old superstition disguised as medicine. You're made to drink a large bowl of lukewarm wine steeped with powdered date seeds, saffron, and crushed pearls. If your belly stirs afterward, if you feel heat in the loins, it's a sign that you are open, that you are ready. The priest mumbles a Latin blessing over your cup. Your lady-in-waiting fans your face. You sip. You wait. You perform a flush of the cheeks and an intake of breath, not because you believe it, but because you've learned it makes the whispers kinder. This is just the beginning. In some courts, especially France and the Holy Roman Empire, a more physical examination followed. Not by physicians, mind you, by the Queen Mother herself. She, along with a pair of older noblewomen, would confirm that you were, quote, capable of receiving the seed. The euphemisms came thick and fast, but the meaning was clear. They'd feel your hips, press gently on your lower belly. In some cases, even inspect your underclothes for signs of proper moisture. Historians still argue whether these rituals were taken seriously or merely symbolic. But the psychological effect, very real. You're not just watched, you're handled, evaluated, judged. And then comes the most delicate part, the ceremonial bedding. It varies court to court. In England, a newlywed royal couple was sometimes accompanied to bed by an entire procession of nobles. Curtains drawn only after the bishop said a final prayer for healthy conception. In Hungary, more private but still attended by at least 2 noblewomen who stayed just outside the bedchamber door to listen. Not for passion, for completion. One French queen, widely believed to be Blanche of Castile, was once asked to provide a second pillow, visibly stained with blood, to verify the deed the morning after. The pillow was paraded through the court. The bedding displayed for 3 days in the Abbey Hall. Nothing says romance quite like linen and judgment. You begin to understand the rules of this strange dance. If you do conceive, your body becomes a shrine. You are praised, bowed to offered food and flattery. But the moment a month passes without signs, the tone shifts. You're asked about your diet. your sleep, your prayers. Whispers begin. Perhaps she is cursed. Perhaps the marriage was never consummated properly. Perhaps the queen harbors secret sin. One particularly brutal custom from Saxony involved placing barren queens on a wombstone, a cold slab said to awaken the child's spirit within. You'd sit there for hours exposed to the elements while monks chanted psalms nearby. How spiritual, how freezing, and yet you endure it. Because you know queens who didn't. Queen Ingeborg of Denmark, married to Philip II of France, was imprisoned for years when she failed to conceive. No charges, no trial, just a cold cell and a slowly vanishing name. Or Anne of Bohemia, whose barrenness was mocked in pamphlets and court songs. Even when the king loved her deeply, the people did not. They wanted heirs, not poetry. But here's the twisted beauty of it all. Once you do bear a child, especially a male one, your power multiplies overnight. You become the mother of the future. You gain influence over tutors, councils, and foreign ambassadors. Even the king begins to look at you differently. And if tragedy strikes, if the child dies, then sympathy becomes your armor. You are no longer just queen. You are sainted. That's why some queens faked pregnancies. Yes, you heard right. Faked. Take Queen Mary I of England. Her body swelled. Her appetite shifted. She secluded herself for delivery, and no child came. Modern scholars believe it was likely a phantom pregnancy, a mix of political pressure and desperate hope. But at the time it was scandal, mockery. One foreign diplomat wrote that, "Her Majesty's belly bears not fruit but fear." And so tonight you rest your hands on your stomach. You're not pregnant yet, but you will be, you hope. Or at least you must appear to be. Tomorrow, you'll ask the cook to prepare more almonds and honey foods of warmth of conception. You'll burn rosemary before sleep. Maybe even slip that little seed pouch under your pillow. And if nothing else, you'll keep the court guessing. Because sometimes the appearance of fertility is almost as valuable as the real thing. You are queen. Your body is both miracle and mystery. And in a palace full of watchers, that mystery might just be your only protection. The musicians have retired. The guards shift on aching feet. And you're wide awake, sitting in the soft glow of your candle, rereading the letter he sent you. No, not your husband. Tonight, we enter the most dangerous territory of all forbidden love, when queens fell for the wrong man. And yes, there's always a wrong man. Sometimes he's a court musician, sometimes a falconer, sometimes, worst of all, a political rival. But whoever he is, he's everything the king is not attentive. Clever, maybe just foolish enough to flirt in the corridor when no one's looking. He doesn't care about treaties or dowries. He wants you. And so begins the slow, exquisite horror of royal longing. A glance across the feasting table. A hand brush during a chess game. A flower left on your seat. These tiny transgressions build a gravity stronger than your wedding vows. You already know the stakes. History is littered with queens who got caught, some merely disgraced, others executed. But still, it happens. Again and again. Take Marguerite de Bourgogne, Queen of France. She and her sisters-in-law were accused of adultery with young knights in a scandal so explosive it became legend. The so-called Tour de Nestlé affair ended with Marguerite imprisoned, and many believe strangled in her cell. The knights publicly tortured and flayed. The message crystal clear: the queen's desire could topple thrones. And yet, desire refuses to die. There's Joan of Kent, whose royal lineage didn't stop her from secretly marrying a soldier of lower rank. When the secret came out, it caused a court meltdown. Annulments were demanded. Her lovers were interrogated. Her reputation was nearly destroyed until her son became king and revised history in her favor. Convenient. But love doesn't always lead to ruin. Sometimes it leads to strategy. Consider Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III. Though never caught in scandal herself, she was suspected of favoring a particular scribe, a man who later received suspicious promotions and even oversaw the royal nursery. Historians still argue whether the relationship was physical, political, or simply maternal. But the power dynamic undeniable. You think of your own scribe. The way he smiles never too long. The way his fingers linger when handing you parchment. The fact that he knows exactly how many rose petals you like in your bath. But it's not just scribes. Queens have fallen for tutors, translators, messengers, artists. One Byzantine queen was said to have had a secret affair with her icon painter, a man whose frescoes in the royal chapel subtly bore her likeness. They're still there today. Love carved into plaster and pigment bold and irreversible. Of course you don't dare anything so reckless. But still, you find ways to speak without words. A ribbon dropped by accident. A gift from the court addressed in his handwriting. A note tucked in a book, its ink smudged with thumbprints. And he understands the risk too, because it's not just your neck on the line. It's his. A man accused of bedding a queen, he'll be interrogated, likely tortured, possibly executed. And yet he stays, smiles, waits in the corridor just a little longer than he should. Sometimes he doesn't even need to exist. That's the thing, queens have been accused of lovers they never had. Because once you're too powerful, too clever, too beloved, they'll invent a scandal to bring you down. Just ask Anne Boleyn. Historians now believe several of the men she was accused of sleeping with, including her own brother, were completely innocent. The charges were likely fabricated to clear the way for her execution. She died head high, denying everything. Her enemies got what they wanted. But her story still haunts every ambitious queen who dares to love or even look. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you were caught. The trial, the speeches, the dress you'd wear to your judgment. Would you deny it? Weep. Or confess with regal defiance and dare them to punish you. But for now you fold the letter. You tuck it away beneath your mirror. You blow out the candle. You don't need a scandal. You need a moment. A heartbeat that belongs only to you, untouched by duty, prophecy, or politics. Because queens, for all their glory, are rarely allowed to love. But they do. In secret gardens. In coded verses. In letters burned at dawn. The sky outside turns bruise purple as thunder rolls distantly across the hills. It's storm season when lightning splits the sky and servants whisper that witches walk the corridors. You've heard it all before. But tonight, your name is in their mouths. And it's not about a lover or a dream or a missed moon. It's about magic. Yes, tonight you are a queen accused of sorcery, not loudly. Not yet. But the signs are there. A courtier won't meet your eyes. A priest blesses you twice instead of once. Your handmaid finds dried herbs stuffed in your mattress, a ward, she says, though you never placed it there. That's how it starts. It's easy to forget that in medieval courts, a woman with too much knowledge of medicine, fertility language, or influence was dangerously close to being called a witch. And if she also happened to be a queen, all the better. Nothing removes a difficult monarch faster than fear in Latin robes. The rumors often begin with small things: a miscarriage, an illness the doctor can't explain, a sudden run of bad weather after your husband's military campaign fails. Clearly, someone cursed the king's sword. And guess who just received a gift of crushed lavender and red string? One of the most whispered cases is that of Queen Joan of Navarre, who married Henry IV of England. Years after his death, she was imprisoned for allegedly using sorcery to harm her stepson, the new king. The evidence, letters, an alchemist's tools, and her foreign origin. She was French intelligent and childless. 3 strikes. She was quietly locked in a castle for over 3 years. Historians still argue whether she practiced any kind of magic, or whether she simply owned too many books. Magic, after all, was rarely about magic. It was about power. A queen who healed the sick with wild herbs. Suspicious. A queen who wore a pendant with unknown symbols. Dangerous. A queen who predicted her husband's death. Executed. You recall the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine, accused more than once of magical influence, especially over her sons who rebelled against their father. No one ever proved anything. But clerics muttered. Her jewelry was examined. Her books burned. Even her choice of clothing, dark silks, raven feathers, deep reds, was treated as evidence. When a queen is too regal, too commanding, it becomes a crime in itself. There were others. A Sicilian queen was rumored to bathe in goat's milk, laced with moonstone powder, to preserve her youth. Another in Bohemia kept a black cat, which disappeared the same night her rival fell mysteriously ill. In Hungary, a queen's confessor claimed she whispered in Latin backward during Mass. These tales twist truth with fiction, but they all share one thing: a fear of women who can't be controlled. And here's the twist: you've begun to collect little charms of your own. Not because you believe in magic, but because you believe in insurance. A sprig of rue hidden in your slipper. A pouch of salt sewn into your pillow. A charm written in Greek, gifted by a monk with trembling hands. You don't flaunt them, but you keep them. Because belief isn't required, only caution. Of course, you also know that your enemies are collecting their own, but not charms, accusations. They've noticed your quiet walks beneath the moon. They've seen the book on your table with strange symbols in the margins. They heard about your visit to the apothecary last week, never mind that it was for your maid's cough. It's enough. One whispered testimony, one wrong moon, and suddenly your crown is slipping. You've read the letters, the papal decrees, the rules about women who consult with spirits, who speak without a man's prompting, who influence outcomes beyond their station. It's you. It's always you. But what they don't realize is this: you don't need magic to be dangerous. You've learned the court's hidden language. You know how to time a pause. You know which bishops have debts and which nobles have secret lovers. You understand fear, and that makes you powerful enough that they must call it magic, because anything else would mean admitting you beat them fair and square. Still, you sleep lightly tonight, just in case. A bundle of herbs smolders faintly in the hearth. You murmur the old prayer, not because you believe in spirits, but because sometimes the words feel like armor. The thunder cracks, the candles gutter, and you smile, because even now, with every shadow whispering your name, they are afraid. Not of your curses, but of your mind. Dawn breaks with the clatter of boots on marble and the rustle of urgent robes. You sit motionless, half-dressed, staring into the golden basin as your maid brushes your hair in silence. There's been an execution. A nobleman, young foolish, too fond of poetry, was found guilty of treason. He'd been in your presence only twice. That was enough. Now they whisper that he looked at you too long. And so you begin to understand the final shape of danger when your sexuality becomes a weapon wielded by others, not for love, not for scandal, but for war. Because when a queen walks into a room, she carries every man's fantasy and every woman's threat. Her body is not her own. It is rumor, leverage, inheritance, and accusation all wrapped in silk. You've seen it before. The way powerful factions invoke your name without consent. The Queen favors this alliance. They'll say, though, you've never spoken to the ambassador. The Queen prefers this general, though he's never stepped foot in your wing of the palace. And suddenly, your name becomes a political chess piece moved without your hand. It's how wars start. In Castile, a queen's rumored involvement with a foreign prince caused her kingdom to splinter, her husband to demand annulment, and her allies to turn overnight. The entire affair had been fabricated, originating in a single forged letter. But it didn't matter. The mere possibility of her unfaithfulness undid treaties that had taken years to build. In Poland, a noble faction attempted to seize power by circulating falsified love poems allegedly written by the Queen to a German duke. The poems were crude, transparent, but the image stuck. She spent the rest of her reign under suspicion, and her husband never trusted her again. Sometimes it's even closer to home. A rival princess might accuse you of seducing her brother. Not because it's true, but because it pushes you into a defensive crouch. Once your virtue is questioned, your influence shrinks. You become less of a diplomat, more of a distraction. Let's not involve her, they whisper. Too much drama. You're no longer a player. You've become the pawn. You try to push back. To clarify, no, you say, I never met that ambassador alone. But denial sounds like guilt when spoken too loudly. So instead, you begin to disappear. You dress more modestly. You avoid eye contact. You skip court dances. Your laughter becomes quieter. You speak only when spoken to, and still they say you're plotting something. Because the truth is, a silent queen is just as dangerous as a seductive one. And then there are the marriages. Oh, the marriages. The endless procession of proposals where your body is the treaty. Not you, your body, your womb, your ability to bear heirs, your skin color, your language, your religious usefulness. You remember being 16 when they first said you'd match well with the king of Aragon's second son. Her complexion will bring peace, said one bishop. Her hips suggest fecundity, said another. No one asked what you wanted, because queens don't marry for love. They are married, like land, or grain, or debt. Once joined, your every move becomes a matter of national interest. If you frown at a banquet, it's a diplomatic crisis. If you smile too long at the wrong lord, it's treason. If you walk alone in the garden, rumor. If you refuse to walk at all, rebellion. You begin to understand why some queens burned their own letters before death. Why some had their journals sealed in stone. Why others whispered secrets only to dying servants, just to make sure no one could twist their desires into weapons once they were gone. But even in death, the war continues. Tomb inscriptions are rewritten. Portraits painted with more demure eyes. Lovers erased. Children's paternity questioned. Look at the case of Queen Violante of Aragon. After her death, enemies circulated tales that she'd seduced multiple advisors and poisoned her husband. None of it was proven, all of it stuck. And you keep your letters hidden in the lining of your old prayer book. You speak only in rooms with 4 witnesses. You learn to smile with your eyes while letting your face remain neutral. You master the art of withholding, because you understand now. As queen, your sexuality is never truly yours. It is borrowed, stolen, threatened, or rebranded. It is held up as virtue one year, weaponized the next. It is adored, feared, blamed, bought. But beneath the jewels and titles and layers of linen, it's still yours, buried somewhere under the etiquette and performance. A private, pulsing truth that no ambassador, bishop, or enemy faction will ever fully own. They can use your image. They can whisper your name. But only you live inside your skin. And that somehow is its own quiet revolution. It's a wedding feast tonight. Not yours, of course, you've already had that parade. This one belongs to a cousin, a niece, some fresh-faced royal girl, barely 16, her hands trembling as she raises the ceremonial cup. Everyone applauds. The air smells of roasted game and crushed petals. But you are watching, smiling, calculating, because now you are no longer the new bride. You are the queen who has survived. And with that survival comes an entirely new world. The court of older queens, dowagers, and retired wives. Those women who have outlived their purpose and learned how to twist invisibility into influence. When you were young, you feared becoming one of them. You pitied them, dressed in dark silks, sitting at the edges of the feast, speaking, rarely always watching. You thought they were irrelevant. But now you know they were the most dangerous women in the room. Because here's the truth. Once you've borne your heir or failed to, you begin to slide off the stage. The king seeks younger flesh. The court turns its attention to newer brides. The dancers no longer bow as deeply. But if you're smart, you use that obscurity like a blade. Consider Blanche of Castile. Again, yes, her name keeps surfacing for a reason. After her husband's death, she ruled as regent for her son. But she wasn't just managing politics. She was shaping marriages, controlling succession, even choosing which rumors were allowed to spread. By the time anyone noticed, she'd restructured the entire court, and no one could stop her. Some queens retired to convents, but not always for prayer. In fact, certain abbeys became quiet kingdoms of female power run by former queens or noblewomen, far from the king's reach. From there, they wrote letters, funded rebellions, even excommunicated enemies through pet bishops. The church, for all its sermons, often trusted widowed queens more than warmongering kings. And then there were those who didn't retire at all, just repositioned. They became matchmakers, spymasters, confessors, matriarchs. Even if stripped of their titles, they knew every secret worth knowing. They could destroy a marriage with a raised eyebrow, arrange an alliance over a needlepoint session. You learn that people talk more freely when they think you've become decorative. Take Isabella of France yet again. After leading a rebellion deposing her husband and ruling briefly through her son, she retired. But in truth, she spent her remaining years orchestrating diplomacy from behind the scenes. She wore a nun's veil, but wrote in steel. And what of those queens who didn't bear heirs? Surely they faded. Not always. Some, like Joanna of Naples, used their status as non-mothers to dodge court expectations entirely. No heir, no problem. She married multiple times, ruled without apology, and controlled trade routes. The church hated her. The merchants loved her. She ruled for decades, and now here you are at the edge of the hall watching a new queen dance. She's lovely, nervous. She glances toward you often, seeks your approval. You offer her a nod. Nothing more. Because here's what she doesn't know yet. The moment her body begins to change, age shift, soften, she will become you. And she'll realize then what you already do, that the palace's most potent secrets are held by those who no longer wear the crown, but once did. You leave the feast early as expected. The hall swirls behind you in gold and laughter. You walk with calm purpose through a corridor lined with tapestries of younger women conquering men with their beauty. You smile at them, let them have their youth. You have something rarer. You have memory, and leverage, and time. The rain taps softly against the stained glass windows of your study as you unwrap the silk bundle resting on your lap. Inside, a letter yellowed with age, tied in faded ribbon. It's from your mother, or perhaps your aunt, or some long-dead queen whose name survives only in a forgotten chapel. The ink is fragile, the words careful, but the message unmistakable. Guard your silences. They are your final kingdom. Tonight we step fully into the twilight, the legacy phase of your reign when your body is no longer watched, weighed or wanted in the same ways, but your story is. And that's the most dangerous chapter yet, because you're no longer the object of desire. Now you're the subject of history. And history, my dear queen, is rarely written by women, especially not royal ones. So you start to plan. Not battles, not births, but narratives. You begin with the portraits. You summon your most loyal artist. You sit for hours, instructing him to soften the lines around your eyes, to place a book, not a jewel, in your hand, to let your gaze meet the viewer's calm and knowing. You are crafting not a likeness, but a message. Portraits are propaganda. You know this. You've stared at enough smug-faced kings holding scepters like clubs. But for you, the trick is subtlety. No grand pose, no crown, just wisdom. Next come the letters. You begin editing your correspondence, removing flippant phrases, rewriting history in ink. You include a few strategic mentions of prayer, of loyalty, of service. You leave out the part about the crushed opals in your bathwater, or the Hungarian ambassador who once kissed your hand just a moment too long. Then, of course, there's your will. Not just the legal document, but the spiritual one. The one your handmaid will find in your jewelry box. The one that names your secrets. Not in full, but just enough. Enough to confuse. Enough to intrigue. Because mystery is the final seduction. You've seen what happens to queens who don't prepare. Their enemies write their stories for them. Their names are dragged through sermons, scandals, or scholarly footnotes. Their legacies reduced to barren, mad, difficult, or worst of all, forgotten. Look at Empress Matilda, a brilliant strategist, rightful heir to the English throne, but remembered by many only as too proud to be crowned. Why? Because she dared to demand power without apology. Historians still argue whether her downfall was political or personal. But the result, her rival got the crown, and she got rewritten. So you go further. You arrange for your favored priest to write a flattering chronicle. You ensure your donations to the abbey are well recorded. You request a tomb inscription that emphasizes wisdom, motherhood, diplomacy. You gently encourage a court poet to compose something mournful and tasteful. Yes, you're preparing to die. But more than that, you're preparing to remain, because you've learned the truth. Queens rarely get justice in life, so they take it in memory. with patience and penmanship. There's even a strange comfort in this. You no longer worry about the king's wandering eye or the slow rumors of your body's decline. Let them gossip. You've outlived most of them. You've become the ghost in their palace, the legend they cautiously invoke, the painting above the hearth that seems to watch. And if you're lucky, if you're clever, you'll become something rarer still, an example. You'll be remembered not for your waste or your fertility or your scandal, but for your survival. Even now, younger women send you gifts. Candied rose petals, poems, a lock of hair from a newborn son named in your honor. They ask for advice in trembling script. They look to you for guidance in a world that still demands perfection from imperfect women. And you give them what you can. A warning here, a blessing there. A name whispered like a spell, the name of a woman who walked the fire and lived. Because if you've learned anything, it's this: a queen's power is never just in her crown. It's in what she leaves behind. And tonight, as the candles flicker low and the ink dries on your final letter, you understand they may twist your story, but you have already shaped its spine. The bells ring softly from the abbey tower, 7 slow chimes that drift over the palace like a lullaby. You sit beneath the canopy of velvet, older now, wrapped in shawls that still smell faintly of cedar and clove. Outside, the garden rustles with the hush of dusk. You can't see the roses from here, but you remember exactly how they bloom. This is the final chapter, not of your life, but of your story as queen. The woman they courted, judged, worshipped, feared, and tried again and again to define. But tonight, just tonight, you are only yourself. And that's a far rarer thing. All around you, the palace continues its clockwork routine. Dinners are served. Messages dispatched. The young queen, your daughter-in-law now, or your niece, dances in the great hall, unaware that the fabric of her gown once belonged to your wedding cloak. Time folds. History repeats. But you remember everything, the feeling of your first coronation veil catching in the wind, the weight of a crown that pinched behind your ears, the sweet, sharp terror of being seen and never really known. You remember the midwife's eyes, the astrologer's hands, the cold ache of your womb when they whispered that you had failed, the fire in your chest when they said you were too bold, the thrill of a forbidden glance, the stillness of waiting to be accused. You remember who you loved, even if no one else does, and now you remember how you lasted. Because for all their power, their punishments, their policies, you remained. Through gossip, through exile, through empty cradles and endless rituals, through queens younger than you who wept in the night and clutched your hand like a lifeline. You endured, and there's something almost funny in the end, how the palace always thought your reign was about them, about kings, about children, about alliances. But really it was about this quiet moment, this breath, this knowing that no one else ever owned you. That your body, your mind, your choices, even under pressure, even under threat, were always quietly, powerfully yours. And yes, they may write what they want. They may smooth your face in portraits, erase the footnotes, invent lovers, or erase the real ones. But you carry the truth in your bones. And sometimes that's enough. The fire crackles softly. You close your eyes. Not because you're tired, but because you've finally arrived. You were queen, you were human, and you were never theirs. Word count 116. Wind down 300 words, so now let your breath slow. Let the images fade. The candlelit corridors, the silk-draped chambers, the murmured prayers and moonlit rituals, let them dissolve into the hush of your room, into the quiet hum of your fan, into the steady beat of your heart. Tonight, you've walked through centuries of shadowed power. You've stood where queens once stood, danced the tightrope between devotion and defiance, and faced the impossible expectations sewn into every hem of every coronation gown. You've carried crowns not made of gold, but of silence, survival, and sharp, unspoken knowing. And maybe that's the greatest truth of all, that queens, for all their robes and rituals, were never just ornaments. They were strategies, stories, warnings, symbols, and still somehow women. Women who burned letters, whispered across latticed balconies, made deals by candlelight, wept into veils, and held empires in their hands, all while pretending it was only embroidery. You might forget the names. That's okay. But you'll remember the feeling, the quiet rebellion, the soft power, the knowledge that even when silenced, you can speak, even when ruled, you resist, and even when forgotten, your story lingers in herbs, in lullabies, in footnotes, in dreams. So breathe, let it go. Let the crown slip from your thoughts. Let the night soften every edge. You've done enough thinking for one evening. Sleep well, my royal ghost. You've earned your rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.